All right, let's talk about what just happened in New York. Because Zoran Mondani just won the Democratic mayoral primary. Not quietly, not by accident, with full throated backing from socialist organizations and hard left activists. He pushed out any semblance of moderate leadership. And yes, if you're a conservative, this should be sounding every alarm in the building. Mondami's platform is a wish list of unworkable ideology: defund the police, abolish ICE, cancel rent, pay taxes to sky-high levels, and create people's budgets that answer to activist demands, not fiscal realities. He doesn't just support the fringe, he is the fringe. And now he's one election away from running the country's biggest city. This matters nationally, but why? Because New York has always set a cultural tone. When radicals win there, it gives momentum to copycats across the country. Mondami's victory sends a signal. If you lean far enough to the left, you will be rewarded, even if the real-world impact is economic collapse, rising crime, and mass taxpayer flight. And let's be real. This is what happens when conservatives ignore city politics. Progressives aren't winning because these races are in the majority. They're winning because they're organized, loud, and determined to reshape institutions from the inside out. And this isn't just about one city. This is a test run for hard left governance. If Mondami wins, expect his agenda to go national. Expect his talking points to show up in Chicago, Los Angeles, and eventually Washington, maybe even Oregon. Conservatives need to start treating these local races as frontline battles, not side stories. There's no real need to speculate what Mondami will do in office. His record and alliances tell you everything. This isn't your average progressive. He's a dues-paying member of the Democrat Socialists of America, and proudly so. That group doesn't believe in reforming the system. They want to dismantle it, brick by brick. If elected mayor, Mondami would be the most ideologically extreme executive in modern U.S. history. His policies aren't just costly, they're designed to fundamentally alter the city's structure. Think less Bloomberg, more Berkeley circa 1969. And the DSA knows exactly what it is doing. They've stopped pretending to be a fringe voice. They're winning elections now. They're writing budgets, hiring staff, and positioning themselves as the future of the Democratic Party. Mondami isn't a fluke. He's a product of a multi-year strategy to move America's urban power base far left. From a conservative standpoint, that's the red flag. He'll push climate mandates that decimate small businesses. He'll weaponize city departments for radical equity enforcement. And he'll work to undermine private property rights in the name of justice. Republicans cannot afford to let this slip under the radar. Mondami isn't just a problem for New York. He's the face of what the left wants everywhere. Conservatives need to elevate this race as a case study in what happens when ideology replaces governance. Under Zoran Mondami's policies, crime will rise. That's not speculation, it's pattern recognition. We've already seen what happens when you cut police funding, limit enforcement, and prioritize criminals over victims. Cities like San Francisco, Portland, and Chicago are living examples. Mondami wants to follow the same script, but double the volume. He has openly advocated for shrinking the NYPD and reinvesting those funds into community programs. And what this means in practice is fewer police, less presence, and slower response times. Criminals don't fear committees. They don't fear community boards. They fear consequences. Remove those, and the results are very predictable. And it won't just stop at policing. Bail reform, sentence leniency, and sanctuary city policies will make New York a magnet for repeat offenders. Combine that with economic policy that punishes entrepreneurs and drives out wealth, and you've got a recipe for a hollowed-out city core. So this is why we should not hold back. The stakes are too high. New York has already suffered under progressive mismanagement, and Mondami would take the city from flawed to unlivable. The warning signs are there. The data is there. The only thing missing is a political will to call it what it is, a threat, not a trend. So, in the case of Zoran Mondami, let's follow the money, or lack of it. Mondami's economic plan reads like it was scribbled on a college dorm whiteboard. Free housing, free transit, public banking, expanded municipal employment. It's a wish list that completely ignores the math. New York City is already bleeding taxpayers and high earners. So what happens when you double their taxes to fund community wealth building? What happens when you make it harder to run a business than it is to apply for a government grant? Here's what happens. Capital leaves. Investment slows. Small businesses shut down. The city gets poorer while the payroll for city government grows. And Mondami's solution to the whole thing? More redistribution. More dependency, less production. He treats wealth like it's static, as if you can tax it without consequence. But wealth is mobile. Capital is mobile. Businesses will go where they're respected, not vilified. That's what conservatives must hammer home. You can't run a city on vibes and slogans. You need budgets, growth, and climate where people want to build. Zoran Mondami doesn't seem to understand this. Or he does and just doesn't care. But either way, the voters need to see that his economics don't just fail, they backfire. So here's the thing. Zoran Mondami didn't rise on charisma alone. He was built by the activist machine. He had endorsements from radical city council members, money from left-wing PACs, and ground game from groups like the Democratic Socialists of America and the Justice Democrats. This was an orchestrated power grab, not a grassroots surprise. And the machine has a playbook. Step 1. Win local primaries with low turnout. Step 2. Flood mailboxes and social media with feel-good language about justice and fairness. Step 3. Once in office, pivot to sweeping changes no one actually voted for. It works because Republicans and moderates often ignore these races. They assume cities already lost. But what happened in New York is proof that silence equals surrender. If conservatives want to stop candidates like Zoran Mondami, they have to fight earlier, harder, and smarter. That means funding challengers, showing up in off-year elections, and messaging clearly about the stakes. Because the other side is very organized and they're playing to win. We haven't been. Here's the thing for Democrats, though. Zoran Mondami is far too left for moderates, but too important to alienate. He's a symbol for the activist base that controls social media narratives and small-dollar donations. That puts the National Party in a bind. Support him and risk backlash in swing states, or criticize him and get eaten alive by their own base. Don't expect a Biden endorsement, but don't expect condemnation either. Mondami will operate with quiet permission, and that's the real danger. The Democratic leadership might not like him, but they're not going to stop him. This opens the door for conservatives, though. Vote in the middle, are uneasy about radical policies, but want to hear alternatives that are grounded, not just reactive. Republicans who can articulate a vision of safety, prosperity, and competence have an opportunity to draw a sharp line and win independence in the process. The key is making sure voters understand this isn't just about one race. It's about what happens when extremes fill the vacuum left by silence. Zoran Mondami is a warning shot, not the local story. Now, let's talk about what Mondami believes when it comes to immigration, because it isn't just extreme, it's dangerously disconnected from reality. He's long supported abolishing ICE, turning New York into a full sanctuary city, and dismantling any border enforcement infrastructure. Not reform, but elimination. That's the agenda. His worldview operates on the assumption that borders are inherently unjust, that anyone from anywhere at any time should have the right to walk into the U.S. without question, documentation, or consequence. It's ideological utopianism masquerading as compassion. But the problem is, cities don't run on ideals, they run on budgets, infrastructure, and law enforcement. And all three break under this kind of a policy. So if you want to understand what Mondami's immigration stance looks like in real life, look at the migrant crisis in New York right now. Shelters are full, budgets are busted, public schools are overwhelmed, and what does Mondami want? More. More bodies, fewer rules, and less enforcement. This isn't humanitarian, that's irresponsible. And it's not sustainable. Conservatives should frame this not as xenophobia, but as a matter of basic structure. Every nation needs borders. Every city needs control. Mondami's version of immigration policy ignores all of that in favor of abstract ideology that collapses the moment it's tested in the real world. Although, while Mondami talks about slashing the defense budget and withdrawing support from U.S. allies like Israel, Iran is escalating in real time. Just this week, Tehran signaled its intention to resume uranium enrichment beyond 60%, and chatter from intel circles suggests increasing missile movements in southern Iran. This is not the time for America to shrink back. But Mondami, like many on the hard left, has built his foreign policy platform on isolationism disguised as anti-imperialism. He's floated support for removing U.S. bases abroad and ending arms sales even to long-standing Democratic allies. So, let's be clear. Iran's regime doesn't care about diplomatic language, it respects force. The more America pulls back, the more power vacuum it creates, and the more emboldened our adversaries become. Mondami's approach would shred our global partnerships, empower rogue states, and reduce America's ability to respond to actual threats. You can't negotiate from weakness, but that's exactly what happens when ideology replaces strategy. Conservatives need to make this point stick. The world doesn't get safer when America retreats. It gets more chaotic. And eventually, that chaos lands at our doorstep. So, back when Israel was dealing with Hezbollah from Lebanon, the situation was really tense. But instead of standing with Israel, a democratic ally in the sea of authoritarian regimes, Zoran Mondani has consistently backed the other side. He's long supported the BDS movement, calling for ending military aid to Israel, and accused the IDF of apartheid. These aren't fringe Twitter takes. They're policy priorities he's endorsed publicly and repeatedly. The left has tried to make support for Israel controversial. But from a conservative standpoint, this isn't complicated. Israel is an ally, it shares our values, it faces existential threats daily, and it doesn't need lectures from armchair ideologues whose closest brush with warfare is a Twitter thread. What Mondami's stance signals is something deeper, a worldview that believes America should step back from its allies, abandon democratic partners, and redefine morality through a lens of post-colonial theory. In other words, it's academic radicalism turned foreign policy, and it's a disaster in waiting. The conservative answer is simple. We support our allies, we reject double standards, and we don't apologize for defending democracy against terrorism. So, in the last 24 hours, U.S. intelligence confirmed a failed Iranian cyber attack on critical infrastructure in the Gulf region, an escalation following months of proxy aggression across the Middle East. But unlike previous years, this time the U.S. didn't respond with a strongly worded statement, it responded with action, targeted disruption operations, and direct coordination with Israeli cyber forces. And this isn't coincidence, it's policy restored. The Trump administration's renewed presence in foreign affairs has reintroduced deterrence, while Biden's years allowed provocations to go unanswered. There's now a tangible shift. Iran is testing limits again, but it's getting real resistance in return. This is why Mondami's isolationist pullback first approach is a non-starter. It assumes that if we disengage, the threats disappear. In reality, power vacuums get filled, and not by democracies. Conservatives must remind voters that strength doesn't cause war, weakness does. A robust U.S. posture abroad keeps aggression in check. The cyber realm is the new battlefield, and the last thing we need is a mayor or a future congressman advocating for disarming ourselves ideologically while our enemies rearm technologically. Now, here's a shift that happens to mean a heck of a lot at the moment. A federal appeals court upheld a key Trump-era ruling limiting asylum eligibility, essentially ending the policy of automatic admission for border crossers without pre-screening. This is a major moment, because for years, we've had a system where anyone who said the word asylum was let in first and questioned later. And what was the result? Fraud, backlog, and abuse. But now, thanks to this ruling, we can return to a rules-based system, where asylum seekers must prove merit before gaining entry, not after. But what does this mean? It means faster processing, fewer loopholes, and most importantly, restored deterrence. The incentive to come illegally drops when the odds of staying are no longer a guarantee. And this isn't just a win for conservatives, it's a win for immigrants who actually followed the law, and for communities overwhelmed by unchecked entries. Conservatives should point to this as a case of policy clarity defeating political games. It's a reminder that border security is not about cruelty, it's about control, and actually following the rule of law. So as far as immigration goes now, a federal judge gave the green light for immediate deportation proceedings for migrants who missed court dates, failed biometric screenings, or submitted incomplete asylum paperwork. That sounds technical, but the impact is enormous. It clears the way for ICE and DHS to remove individuals who've been gaming the system for months, if not years. And these aren't isolated cases. We're talking thousands of pending removals now unblocked. The left will paint this as heartless, but in truth it restores order to a system long hijacked by activist lawyers and endless appeals cycles. We're finally seeing enforcement take priority over excuses. Conservatives should celebrate this moment. It's the clearest sign yet that the judiciary is waking up to the crisis, and it's a message to would-be border crossers that loopholes are closing. It may not make headlines on mainstream media, but this is the kind of systemic correction that can change the trajectory of border enforcement for years. Quiet win? Maybe. But it's the kind of quiet that builds momentum. We're doing good, just gotta keep up the good work. So we have finally ended the disastrous catch and release policy that led thousands of migrants to vanish into the interior of the country with nothing but a court summons and no follow-up. Under the reinstated directive, migrants without clear asylum claims are detained immediately and processed through expedited removal. And this matters. It signals that the Trump administration isn't playing by Biden's rules anymore, and the effect is already visible. Border Patrol agents are reporting fewer repeat crossings, and local jurisdictions are seeing reduced shelter overflows. The left will call this inhumane, but let's get real for a second. You can't have an immigration system where the only penalty for breaking the law is paperwork. Detention works because it sends a message. The border is not a suggestion. Conservatives should frame this as a win for every overwhelmed community, every overburdened taxpayer, and every legal immigrant who played by the rules. If we want national security, it does start with enforcement. In a quietly monumental decision, the Supreme Court sided with states suing the federal government over regulatory overreach, specifically attempts by Biden-era agencies to impose environmental mandates on infrastructure projects without congressional approval. And this isn't just a legal win, it's a philosophical one. The court sent a clear message. If an agency wants to rewrite the law, it needs to go through the legislator. This matters for every conservative watching the alphabet soup of federal bureaucracy expand its power under progressive governance. From the EPA to the Department of Education, the left has relied on unelected officials to push through climate rules, DEI programs, and spending initiatives that never would have passed through Congress. Now that the lease just got a lot shorter, if you're on the right, this ruling opens the door to challenge everything from woke environmental standards to forced ESG compliance. It's an opportunity to reset the balance of power in favor of the Constitution, and it shows that courts matter, especially when they remember who's supposed to write the laws in the first place. President Trump has just gotten another legal win. A federal appeals court struck down a proposed gag order that would have prevented Trump from discussing parts of his legal cases while campaigning. The ruling makes it clear. Political speech, especially during an election season, doesn't get put on pause just because the left is offended by it. And this is a lot bigger than Trump because lawfare has been an issue for a very long time. It's about whether the government can silence a political figure while allowing media outlets and prosecutors to leak details at will. And the court just said, no. For conservatives, this isn't just a technical ruling. It's permission to go back onto offense. It reminds the public that the legal attacks on President Trump aren't just legal, they're strategic. They're about sidelining a candidate the establishment can't control. Now the court has forced the opposition to fight in the open, not behind courtroom doors. That's a win for free speech, due process, and a healthy democracy, so that hopefully, when 2028 comes around, there won't be the same lawfare battle that we had during the 2024 election, where President Trump thankfully still got into the White House again. President Trump got another win. In a separate federal case, a judge signaled skepticism over the scope of special counsel Jack Smith's authority, specifically questioning whether the classified documents case against Trump had been constructed on a rushed, politically motivated timeline. This is huge, because it means the charges disappear overnight. But because it shows the judiciary is no longer rubber stamping whatever the DOJ throws at it, the credibility of the prosecution is being tested, and it's showing cracks. This shift matters for the political narrative. For months, the media framed Trump's legal battles as foregone conclusions. Now the courts are doing something radical. They're asking real questions. Conservatives need to use this point to pivot. Don't just argue that Trump is innocent, argue the system itself is being misused, and that these court rulings as proof not all judges are willing to play politics with the Constitution. And that's good, we should be pushing this further. So here is a subtle but very important shift. DHS announced that it's resuming large-scale removals under a new public health authority that mirrors Title 42. But without the same legal baggage. It's a smart move. The previous policy had been targeted in court precisely because it used COVID as its justification. This new version uses a broader emergency power clause, and it's working. But what does this mean practically? It means faster illegal removals, fewer legal barriers, and less opportunity for activist groups to file last-minute injunctions. That's what the Trump team has been trying to get back to since day one, and now it's finally happening. And what's even better, the media can't attack it using the same pandemic overreach framing. It's bureaucratically cleaner, legally safer, and politically harder to spin. So conservatives should champion this development, not because it's flashy, but because it's effective. Quiet competence beats out loud chaos, and this is the kind of policy that protects the border without getting bogged down in lawsuits every 30 seconds. So another procedural update that slipped under the radar, but has major implications, is the Executive Office for Immigration Review issued a new directive ordering immigration judges to prioritize final rulings for removal cases that have dragged on for more than 3 years. And this may sound dull, but it's a game changer. Why? Because activist lawyers have used delays as a weapon for decades. The longer the case drags, the more likely a person stays, works illegally, or gets shielded by new policies. And that ends now. Judges are being told, move the docket or lose your authority. And this matters for the integrity of the system, and it matters politically. Conservatives can point to this and say, here's proof of the rule of law still working when we stop playing games. And this isn't about punishing people, it's about restoring credibility. Immigration law means nothing if it's never enforced. Alright, here's the thing as far as Zoran Mondani goes. His win in the Democratic primary isn't just a local New York problem. It's a warning shot to every city in America. This wasn't a fringe activist grabbing attention. This was a coordinated, well-funded, ideologically disciplined campaign that succeeded because no one on the right took it seriously early on. So, we have to stop treating radical leftism like a social media trend. It's not a TikTok phase. It's a real political movement, and it's gaining ground while we argue about whether cities are already lost. Mondami's playbook, open borders, anti-police, socialist economics, is now the blueprint for progressive candidates in every major metro area. So, what do? First, conservatives need to show up. Local races matter. The school board matters. The city council matters. Because this is what the left is building in its bench. And second, we need to start calling this ideology what it is, a recipe for collapse. Not just political disagreement, but actual breakdown of the law, order, economy, and safety. If Mondami becomes mayor, the next wave won't be far behind. But that outcome is still preventable if we act now. So, on Mondami's ideology, it only thrives if conservatives stay quiet. His policies don't win on merit. They win through repetition, moral framing, and media cover. And every time we pull our punches, every time we call it progressive instead of what it really is, radical redistributionist policies, we give it oxygen. Mondami wants to cut the police, flood the housing market with city-controlled development, and push race-based redistribution under the label of equity. That's not reform. It's re-engineering society through ideology, and we need to call it that. The conservative job here isn't to compromise with insanity, it's to tell the truth about it. That doesn't mean screaming, it means breaking it down step by step, policy by policy, and showing how these ideas fail real people in real time. Because once voters hear what's actually on the table, they recoil. They don't want chaos. They don't want crime. They don't want their city turned into a laboratory for ideas that collapse under their own weight. But they will accept it if we don't explain the alternative. Well, another pivotal day for the Trump campaign, but also for the broader message of conservative leadership. Strength works. The court victories on immigration, speech, and executive authority all point to the same theme. When you stand firm, the institutions either adapt or lose their grip. And this isn't about nostalgia, it's about results. The last few years of weak enforcement, apologetic foreign policy, and domestic chaos didn't happen by accident. They happened because we stopped leading with confidence. But now we're seeing what happens when you put backbone into the equation. So, let's talk about these wins with clarity. Trump did not get lucky. His administration moved with purpose. Judges didn't flip, they were persuaded by constitutional amendments. And the bureaucracy didn't yield because of feelings, it yielded because of law enforceable policy. If you want to connect with the voters on the fence, show them the difference. Talk about what was happening at the border under Biden, and then point to the current Trump administration. That contrast writes the story on its own. For years, conservatives have treated the courts like referees, neutral parties who might or might not call things fairly. But if the current time has taught us anything, it's that the courts can be powerful tools if you show up with strong arguments that actually follow through. From immigration to executive authority, these rulings are proof that legal strategy does actually matter. The left has long understood this. That's why they embed activists into every level of the legal system. So now it's time we caught up. Don't just complain about bad rulings, file challenges. Build the cases, back the legal teams. Because the court isn't just a last resort, it's a political battlefield. And when we play the game strategically, we actually do win. President Trump proved it. It's easy to forget that the Constitution still has teeth, but this week especially it proved it does. The question is whether we'll keep pressing or let the momentum die. It's not that conservatives need to shout louder, we need to speak sharper. The left wins culture fights by attaching moral language to every policy. They don't say massive new taxes, they say investments in justice. They don't say removing police, they say reimagining safety. This kind of framing works on undecided voters. So here's the rule: match their emotion with facts, then reframe the moral ground. Want to fight Zoran Mondami's housing plan? Don't just call it socialism, say this: it's a government power grab that punishes working class homeowners. That resonates. Want to counter his open border stance? Say something more along the lines of, this is policy that overwhelms schools and hospitals, hurting people that are already there. If we want to stop the rise of radical city governance, we can't just talk about freedom in vague terms. We need to link leftist policies to real-world costs, crime, inflation, disorder, and do it over and over again until people feel it. Because, to be honest, they're already feeling it. We just need to show them where it's coming from instead of using all these different phrases that are crafted by the left. So, just to keep it blunt, the momentum is real. Whether it's Mondami in New York, activist prosecutors in Chicago, or illegal border crossings, this isn't a moment to observe. It's a moment to engage or risk watching the entire system bend to the radical fringe. But here's the good news. The court wins, the Trump policy resets, and the growing backlash against progressive crime policies. These are opportunities. Conservatives are not out of moves. We just have to make them. So, speak clearly, challenge false narratives, support candidates who actually stand for something. Get involved in local elections, legal challenges, school boards, do something. Because the left isn't waiting, and Zoran Mondami isn't a one-off, he's a model. The only way to stop that model from spreading is to confront it early, expose its failures, and replace it with ideas that actually work. It's not about saving one city, it's about keeping the country sane. I'm sure you have all seen what has happened to all of American society ever since Obama was president. It'll only get worse unless you act. So, act.